Welcome back to the channel where history gets real, gritty, gross, and unforgettable. Think your job is tough? Just wait till you hear what people had to do in Tudor England. Imagine waking up one morning in Tudor England sometime between 1485 and 1603. You need a job, but your choices are far from pleasant. Maybe you'll spend all day standing in human urine, soaking in the stench for 12 hours. Or perhaps you'll work for the king helping with his most private bathroom needs. If you're really unlucky, you might end up in a cesspit surrounded by poisonous gas. Just ask Richard the Raker. His story didn't end well. This video will take you through 12 of the most horrible jobs in Tudor England. Jobs so filthy and cruel, they make your worst workday look like a tropical vacation. And no, we're not making this up. One man's actual job was to handle the king's toilet habits, and it paid well. Yes, nobles even fought over that role. That's how strange and brutal the working world was back then. Step into a time when injuries meant rotting feet and daily risks of drowning in waste, where the only bonus was keeping the dead rats you found. These jobs were real. The pain was real. And now you're about to discover just how bad it truly was. Number 12, the handpin maker. Let's begin with what might seem like the least terrible job on this list. But don't be fooled. By the end of this segment, you'll understand why even this seemingly simple craft was an exhausting, painful, and life-shortening nightmare. Back in Tudor England, pins weren't cheap throwaway items like they are today. They were essential for clothing, yet each one had to be made entirely by hand. There were no machines, no shortcuts, just human hands and metal. Making a single pin took 18 precise steps, yes, 18. And the terrifying part, a skilled worker was expected to complete thousands of pins every single day. The process started with brass wire. You had to manually straighten it, cut it into pieces, then sharpen one end with a file. Next, you'd attach a tiny head made of more wire, hammer it flat, and then polish the whole thing inside a bag filled with brown and chalk dust. That bag had to be shaken by hand for hours, literally hours, just to get the right finish. But here's where it turns hellish, the dust. It got everywhere. In your eyes, your lungs, under your nails, in your food, your hair, there was no escape. The constant inhalation of brass dust led to a condition called brass founder's ague, likely a form of heavy metal poisoning. And remember all of this for a job that paid literal pennies. A good pin maker could make up to 4,000 pins a day. That's 4,000 tiny metal objects sharpened, hammered, polished by hand every single day. The intense focus required often destroyed their eyesight, and most pin makers were nearly or completely blind by their 40s. On top of that, the repetitive hand movements led to crippling arthritis, leaving many permanently hunched and in pain. And this wasn't just adult labor. Entire families, including children as young as 4 or 5, were roped into the trade. Their tiny fingers were considered perfect for the delicate parts. By age 10, many children were handling the full 18-step process, and by 30, they were often disabled, blind, and discarded, replaced by the next generation of child workers. This brutal cycle went on for centuries, only ending with the rise of industrial pin-making machines during the Industrial Revolution. But for 300 years, these workers bent over their benches, slowly destroying their bodies to create the tiny fasteners that held together Tudor England's clothing. Number 11, the dog whipper. If you thought handpin making was bad, buckle up. We're just getting warmed up. Tudor England had a real gift for inventing jobs that were not only physically exhausting, but also deeply humiliating and bizarre. And nothing captures that strange cocktail better than the job of the dog whipper. Yes, that was a real official position, and no, it's not a joke. Many churches in Tudor England actually employed a person whose entire job was to chase dogs out of church. Why? Because back then, dogs weren't just pets. They were everywhere. People brought them to markets to work, and yes, even to Sunday service. Imagine this. It's a chilly Sunday morning in a small Tudor town. The church is filled to bursting people packed shoulder to shoulder, the priest standing at the pulpit trying to deliver his sermon. But instead of solemn silence, the air is full of chaos. Lady Peaton's tiny lapdog is barking non-stop at Farmer John's scruffy sheepdog. The blacksmith's hulking mastiff is growling at a toddler. Somewhere near the back, two terriers are having a full-on brawl over a dead bird they dragged in from outside. That's where the dog whipper came in. Armed with a long whip and a pair of wooden tongs, he would patrol the aisles like some strange medieval bouncer. His mission: maintain peace and keep the sacred space from turning into a kennel. One bark crack, two dogs wrestling the tongs snap shut. Sometimes he had to drag animals out mid-sermon, much to the embarrassment of their owners. But here's where things get even more absurd. The dog whipper didn't only deal with dogs. His authority extended to unruly children, flirty teenagers, and even dozing churchgoers. If a boy was fidgeting, too much whip. A couple holding hands behind a pillar whip. Someone snoring in the third pew. You already know the answer. It sounds funny until you consider the danger. One wrong move, say, whipping the local lord's prized hunting dog, and you could find yourself jobless or toothless, depending on the squire's temper. Dog whippers were often bitten punched by angry parishioners or publicly ridiculed for doing their job too well or not well enough. It was a position that came with zero prestige, minimal pay, and maximum risk. Yet despite all that, the role persisted. In some parishes, dog whippers were still active well into the Victorian era. Eventually, as social standards evolved and it became unacceptable to bring animals into churches, the role faded into history. But for centuries, this strange figure, part guard, part disciplinarian, part zookeeper, roamed the pews with whip in hand, trying desperately to bring order to the chaos that was a Tudor Sunday service. Number 10. The executioner's assistant. When we imagine executions in Tudor times, we usually picture the final moment. The axe swings down, the crowd gasps, and it's all over. But before that dramatic scene, someone had to handle the hard part behind the curtain, sharpening the blade, testing the chopping block, tying up the prisoner, cleaning up afterward. That someone was the executioner's assistant, also called the headsman. This wasn't just a helper with a strong stomach. The assistant needed skill, precision, and nerves of steel. Take the axe, for example. It had to be just sharp enough to slice clean through a neck in one blow. Too dull, and it would cause a slow, painful death. Too sharp, and it might splinter against the wooden block. There's a reason Anne Boleyn begged for a swordsman from France. Not everyone got that lucky. During the execution, the assistant would tie the prisoner's hands, help them kneel at the block, and sometimes even hold them still if they were struggling or panicking. Yes, part of the job was to physically steady a living person so their head could be cut off. It was gruesome, terrifying, and very real. But the worst part, it came after the execution. The heads weren't respectfully buried, they were put on public display. It was the assistant's job to collect the severed head, boil it in salted water and cumin, then cover it with tar to keep it from rotting too quickly. There was even a standard recipe for preserving human heads. Imagine knowing that and still going to work each day. And for those found guilty of treason, beheading was the easy way out. The full punishment was much worse. Hanging, then being cut open, alive, then beheaded, and finally chopped into 4 pieces. Guess who helped with all of that? Yes, the assistant. It wasn't just swinging an axe. It was full-body horror from start to finish. As time went on, and execution methods became a little more civilized, the assistant's role still didn't change much. He continued to do the unseen bloody labor that allowed governments to carry out death sentences. He was the quiet hand behind the horror. Number 9, the bear word. In Tudor England, bear baiting wasn't just a sideshow. It was a national obsession as popular as football in modern America. And someone had to manage the massive, furious animals at the center of it all. That job belonged to the bear word. His work began long before the crowds arrived. He would find bear cubs, take them in, and raise them not with kindness, but with cruelty. They were beaten, starved, and tortured until they became aggressive enough to entertain the crowd. The bears had their claws clipped and their teeth filed down. But this wasn't for safety, it was to make the fights drag on longer. On the day of a fight, the bear word chained the bear to a post in the middle of the arena. Then packs of dogs were released to attack it. The bear word stayed in the pit through it all, making sure the chain didn't snap, swapping out dead dogs for fresh ones, and even poking the bear if it wasn't fighting hard enough. One mistake, though, and everything could go wrong. Bears are powerful, clever animals, and they don't forget. Many bear words were attacked and killed by the very animals they had raised and abused. There are actual reports of bear words found dead inside the pit, mauled by a bear that had finally got its revenge. The job finally disappeared in 1835 when bear baiting was officially outlawed. Number 8, the raker. Let's step into Tudor London. Now imagine the worst public toilet you've ever seen, then multiply that across an entire city. There were no proper drains, no trash collection. People threw everything out the window, rotten food, dead animals, even human waste. And someone had to clean it all up. That someone was called the raker. They worked before sunrise, pushing heavy carts armed with long rakes and shovels. But these carts often leaked filth behind them as they moved. On a good day, the streets were ankle-deep in waste. On a bad day, especially after rain, it could reach your knees. They also had to dodge flying chamber pots. Yes, people would dump waste from upstairs windows and deal with bloated animal corpses that sometimes exploded when moved. Rakers earned barely anything, so they'd dig through the muck. For anything they could sell buttons, coins, fabric, bones. It was dangerous, disgusting, and thankless. But it was a job. And back then, even that meant something. And hey, if you're shocked that literal rivers of human waste and maggots used to flow through the streets where people lived and worked, hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more history. Like this, they didn't teach you in school. Secret societies, forgotten horrors, and dark truths that are way weirder than fiction. Number 7, the saltpeter man. Before factories, gunpowder didn't just appear. It had to be made, and one key ingredient was saltpeter. England didn't have natural sources of it, so they made it themselves. And to get it, they sent in saltpetre men. These men had official royal orders that let them dig up the floors of any home-stable church or cellar. Wherever waste had been breaking down like animal stalls or outhouses, nitrate-rich earth could be found. They'd knock flash their royal warrant and go straight to digging. Stone tiles, wooden planks. Didn't matter. They'd rip them all up, bag the earth, and leave behind a mess. You couldn't say no, even if they left a giant hole in your floor. And since they were paid based on how much soil they collected, they were far from gentle. People hated them. Some tried to bribe them to leave. Others grabbed tools and chased them off. There are real court records of entire villages uniting to drive them away. But the saltpeter men always came back. Gunpowder was too important. This job finally disappeared in the 1600s when England began importing saltpeter from India. Number 6, the plague searcher. Imagine London during a plague outbreak. The dead pile up faster than they can be buried. and the city needs to know who's dying of what. So they hired a group of women called plague searchers, also known as searchers of the dead. Most were elderly women from poor backgrounds. They had no medical training. Their only qualification: I've seen a lot of dead bodies. For just 4 pennies per corpse, these women had to go into plague-stricken homes, examine the dead, and check for signs. Blackened skin, swollen buboes, bloody froth from the mouth. They had no gloves, no masks, no protection at all, just bare hands and sheer courage. Naturally, people distrusted and feared them. They were blamed for spreading illness. Some families bribed them to mark the death as natural causes to avoid having their homes locked down. And when bribes didn't work, violence sometimes followed. The job stuck around until 1836, when the government finally required proper medical certification for deaths. But for centuries, these brave but desperate women walked into disease-ridden homes face to face with death because someone had to. Number 5, the woad dyer. In medieval England, if you wore anything dyed blue, there's a good chance it came from woad. But behind that pretty color was a job so disgusting that Queen Elizabeth I banned it from being done within 5 miles of any royal house. Woad dyers started by crushing the leaves of the woad plant into a thick paste. But the real magic or nightmare began when they added the fermenting agent, human urine. This foul mixture was left to rot in huge vats, creating a smell that, according to old reports, words could not describe. As it fermented, the mixture gave off toxic fumes that burned your lungs, your eyes, and your skin. Many woad dyers went blind over time. Their lungs were damaged, and their skin turned a bluish-green shade from constant contact with the dye. They spent hours standing over the vat, stirring the mix with long sticks. The fumes rose straight into their faces. Some workers collapsed and drowned in the vats. Others were pulled out, but never fully recovered from the burns. Entire neighborhoods were built around woad dye factories, and they were avoided by everyone else. Even people with other smelly jobs looked down on woad dyers. That's how bad it was. Number 4, the spit boy. Now imagine a grand feast at King Henry VIII's palace. Hundreds of dishes, dozens of roasts, all cooking at once. Each one needed to be turned slowly and evenly for hours. But they didn't have machines back then, so they used spit boys, usually boys as young as 7 or 8. These kids would sit crouched beside giant open fires, turning the heavy spits by hand. The temperature often went above 100 degrees Fahrenheit or over 80 degrees. To protect themselves, they wrapped wet rags around their hands and faces. But those rags dried out quickly in the heat. If they stopped turning for even a second, the meat would burn, and the head cook would beat them. Many fainted from the heat. If they passed out, they'd be splashed with water and shoved back to work. They were often nearly naked because clothes could catch fire. So they sat there hour after hour, their bare skin burning in the heat. Some spit boys worked 18 hours straight during big feasts. The job only disappeared when mechanical turners were invented in the 1600s. Until then, children were the engines of royal kitchens. Number 3, the fuller. If you owned soft wool clothing in medieval England, it got that way thanks to a fuller. But you wouldn't want their job. To clean raw wool, they used fermented human urine. That's right, stale pea. It had to sit until the ammonia levels were strong enough to break down the grease in the wool. Fullers would collect urine from public pots placed on street corners. Then they'd step into large vats filled with the sour-smelling mix barefoot and stomp the wool for hours. The smell was so bad that fullers were banned from living inside the city. Their skin often burned from the chemicals. Their lungs suffered too, breathing in the ammonia fumes all day. It was hard, painful, disgusting work, often done by the poorest people, sometimes even children as young as 6. Eventually, machines replaced this job. But for centuries, every soft wool cloak worn by nobles had been cleaned by someone wading through human waste. Number 2, the groom of the stool. Believe it or not, one of the most powerful jobs in the royal court was wiping the king's bottom. This role was called the groom of the stool. And yes, actual dukes and earls fought over it. The groom was in charge of the king's stool, basically a fancy portable toilet. But his duties went far beyond that. He had to watch the king's diet track every bathroom trip, and yes, help clean the royal rear. So why would anyone want this job? Because in medieval times, access to the king meant power. And no one had more private trusted access than the man who helped the king use the toilet. While His Majesty was doing his business, the groom could talk politics, give advice, or ask for favors. Over time, the king would trust this servant more than most advisors. The groom even had to keep written records of the king's bathroom habits, how often, what color, and what consistency. Some of these records still exist today. That's right. Somewhere in the British archives, there are official notes on Henry VIII's poop. The job finally faded away after the Stuart period when bathrooms improved and personal doctors took over the health-related duties. Number 1, the gong farmer. Imagine this. It's 3 a.m. in London. The year is 1547. While the city sleeps, one unlucky worker climbs into a deep hole full of human waste with only a shovel and a bit of hope. This was a normal Tuesday night for a gong farmer. Back then, toilets didn't flush. Every home or building had a cesspit, a big underground hole where waste collected. It would sit there, rotting, releasing poisonous gas, and spreading disease until someone came to clean it out. That someone was the gong farmer. They worked only at night. Why? Because the smell was so awful, city laws banned them from working during the day. That's right, the stench was so bad that towns literally made it illegal to deal with it when the sun was up. So late at night, the gong farmer would climb into the pit, sometimes up to their knees, or even waist in human waste, shoveling it out one bucket at a time. The fumes were deadly. Many passed out on the job. Some, like a man named Richard the Raker, even drowned in it. Yes, he died in a pit of poop, and the job didn't end there. After hours, in the cesspit covered head to toe in filth, you still had to push a heavy cart full of waste outside the city walls in the dark, for all that you'd earn 2 shillings a night. Most gong farmers didn't live long. The toxic gases, the diseases, the danger. It was one of the deadliest jobs in Tudor England. But people did it. They did it because they needed food, they had families, and it was either this or starve. The job only disappeared when modern sewage systems were built in the 1800s. But for over 400 years, these people were the hidden workers, keeping cities from being buried in their own waste. And there you have it. 12 medieval jobs, so horrible they were basically hell. Each one more gruesome than the last. These weren't just odd jobs, they were full of pain, disease, danger, and shame. Yet people did them anyway. Day after day, year after year. They did them because they had no other choice. They suffered in silence while keeping their cities running. And in return, society often ignored or mocked them. So the next time your job feels hard, just remember, at least you're not ankle deep in fermented urine. At least you're not boiling heads for display. At least you're not writing detailed notes about a king's bowel movements. These jobs are gone now thanks to modern plumbing labor laws and a bit of basic human decency. But their legacy lives on in the health and safety rules we follow today. In the understanding that no one should have to choose between dignity and survival. Because honestly, could you imagine adding this to your resume? Groom of the stool oversaw high-level sanitation strategy for royal leadership. Yeah, I'll take my desk job. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to appreciate my clean modern bathroom and thank the universe I don't have to climb into a cesspit at 3 in the morning. Rest in peace, medieval jobs, unmourned, unmissed, and please never brought back. If you found this journey through history's worst jobs, both horrifying and oddly fascinating, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more bizarre tales from the past. Thanks for watching, and be grateful you don't have to clean up after a king or swim in a cesspit for a living. See you in the next one.